My name is Oratile Kifihlile, as introduced, and I'm sure that you had very exciting days prior, very informative days as well. We also saw that there were very informative panel discussions that were had as a way of also, ensuring that your stay in Botswana is as fruitful as you would wish it to be, is as impactful as you would wish it to be. Without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to get straight into the program so that we allow for our time to actually be within the parameters that we had initially set. I'm going to start off by alerting you to some of the housekeeping rules. For those that are joining us only today, we have the bathrooms as you exit through that door as you entered. The bathrooms are on your right, or on my right, and on your they will definitely be on your right as well. They are clearly labeled, ladies and gentlemen, for your convenience. You should be able to tell where exactly you are meant to go. So please make sure that you use their service. Without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome you once again to Africa's Travel, Tourism and Aviation CEOs and Executives Forum. We have panel discussions that are planned for you that will be speaking to their theme. And I'd like to welcome our first moderator for the first panel, which will be talking to Hard Talk, the state of Africa's visa openness and its impact on Destination Africa 2030. Ladies and gentlemen, help me welcome to stage the moderator for this here panel. He is the CEO of Tourism Business Council of South Africa. His name is Chifiwa Chivengwa. Please let's welcome him to stage with a thunderous round of applause.
Good morning, everyone. It's always difficult to start day two, because, of what happens in the evenings. When we talk about the night economy. So we will be talking about visa openness and how it impacts Destination Africa, looking into 2030 and beyond. And indeed, this is a hard talk because yesterday when we were deliberating on many other matters, we often spoke, or we always speak about the situation in and around Africa regarding the visa and how it's difficult to get from one point to the next. And in the spirit of promoting intra-Africa travel, it's important that we discuss this. And when we discuss this, it's not because, we are politicians and we can, a stroke of a pen, change the situation around the, the continent. But we do so because if we stop talking about it, no one else will talk about it. And it's just going to become one of those things that, just get lost in the midst of other discussions. So we do so knowing where we stand and the fact that we are advocates and knowing that, we need to push the envelope to get to a point where there is a full understanding of how travel and tourism impact the economies of various countries in Africa. So I'm not going to be doing this alone. I have a very easy task. I'm just a moderator. And the panelists that will be contributing to this discussion, we have the Director, Africa Department, UN Tourism Spain, Elsia Grandcourt, who will be joining us here at the stage. And then we have Daphne Lekipaika, Trade in Service Expert, AFCTA Secretariat. Thank you. And then we have Dr. Oluwafemi Solomon Olamuyiwa, Program Coordinator on Free Movement of Persons in Africa from the African Union Commission. Is he here? Okay. Mr. Aaron Munetsi, the CEO of Airline Association of Southern Africa. And the last person, Christian Gakwaya, the CEO and founder, Rwanda Events. All right, so we're going to start. So we're going to make this a very interactive session, an exciting one for the morning, so that those who come late should feel that they missed out. So to start with, the issue around all right. Okay, this is a very difficult, topic to discuss, but we have to do it. We talk, as I've said, a lot about the visa openness, especially for African countries, in intra-Africa travel, also for us as Africans when we travel to other continents, and the fact that we almost need visa to travel around. So we need to break it down in various aspects. But before we do that, what does visa openness mean to yourselves? And I'm going to start with you, Elsha, from the UN, perspective. What does it mean when we talk about visa openness?
Thank you. Indeed, as you rightly said, this is a topic that is ongoing, a discussion that is also at the core of the work that we do at UN Tourism. In fact, it's one of the core agenda items that the ministers of tourism have tasked us to give the support. And as you know, our role is mostly on advocacy. So for me, as you ask the question, what does it mean, visa openness? It's for us to be able to have the free movement of people, goods, services, so that when you're moving from one point to the other, country to country, you shouldn't have these barriers that are existing. So that when you're planning your travel, you shouldn't be going through all these obstacles and hurdles of getting to your ultimate final destination. It should be, as we say, seamless. You buy your ticket, you travel, you get to enjoy your stay, and you come back. But unfortunately, the reality is not that. We have to go through various steps, and we all go through it, but we hope that with time, countries can pick up on what the others are doing in order to be able to give that seamless and open between countries.
Thank you very much for that. And I think the key word there is seamless. How do we move around without too many restrictions? And, from, Delphine, from your perspective, when we talk about visa openness, how do you see it? Even from, the Africa Continental Free Trade, work that you do. If we open up the continent, say it's visa-free, what would that do?
From the perspective of the work we're doing in terms of facilitating inter-African trade, we recognize the crucial role that the movement of persons will do in terms of facilitating inter-African trade. The movement of people is a core part of the work that we're doing, in the sense that even the agreement, the AfCFTA agreement, pronounces itself under the preamble and objectives in terms of facilitating not only the movement of goods and services and investment, but also facilitating the movement of persons. This is because, for example, giving the example of trading goods, the people who are moving the tracks, we're talking about truck drivers. When we come to services at the core of it, mode for supply, which is the temporary movement of natural persons, is intrinsically linked to how we're unlocking more opportunities for service providers on the continent. So in that regard, how do we foresee, and just to also echo the words of my fellow panelists in terms of the importance of the work that we're doing in movement of persons. So we see a future if we address issues on visa restrictions, even going beyond issues of perhaps temporary permits of tourists. We're talking about the importance of addressing issues on work permits, which is at the core of the work we're doing in terms of unlocking the potential under the Protocol on Trading Services. So we have done extensive negotiations, for example, under tourism services, but then that needs to be complemented with domesticated rules that specifically address issues on visa restrictions beyond entry of tourists, but also address conditions of entry, periods of stay, for example, particularly for service providers in those respective industries. So we see at the Secretariat a future where if we open visa and address those constraints, definitely inter-African trade will grow and will definitely be able to realize the objectives that we have under the agreement. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we know from what you said that if we open up the movements of goods and people, we should see some level of prosperity, coming into, various countries. But let's get into that prosperity. Mr. Munezi, from the airline's point of view, visa openness. I know that there are many declarations that have been signed, to make sure that, there are as many airlines that are flying across the continent. From the airline's point of view, when we talk about visa openness, if we are to achieve it to the level where it's satisfactory, what would it mean in terms of movement of passengers, using, airlines in Africa?
So I think first and foremost, it's important for us to understand that when we talk about visas, we are talking of an artificial barrier. Because visas are not natural to Africa. They are not natural. It's an imposition that we actually got from, for lack of a better term, from our political inclusion. So it was brought upon us by our political situation. So because of that, you got to understand that countries have now gotten used to this artificial barrier called a visa. Now, when you understand that there is actually almost like a comfort factor that countries have gotten used to, it became an even more difficult factor because it became economic, because you pay for a visa. So countries now have to accommodate and account for the process of issuing a visa because it's an economic activity. Now you bring us in as airlines and we tell you that you're actually shooting yourself in the foot. You're scoring an unnecessary own goal, because if you remove that artificial barrier, if you think that you are going to make X amount of dollars issuing a visa, you are actually neglecting the fact that you make 10 times more by allowing people to come into your country, especially Africans, visa-free. I'll give you an example. And I'm the kind of person who doesn't hesitate to name and shame. So, are they laughing? So, Zanzibar introduces a $44 US compulsory, they call it a medical fee, whatever they want to call it, $44 US. So if you are a family of 4, you're talking of $200 that you had not budgeted for, that you must pay to go and spend leisure time in Zanzibar. Compare that with Mauritius, another African country that allows you to come without having to pay $44 and $200. So where would you go, Chifiwa? I am sure 100% that if you are a family of 4, it's a no-brainer. You go to Mauritius because you're not going to be allowed, you are not going to be burdened with pay. So here is where the visa comes in. The visa actually becomes a psychological barrier that says, if I am to go to this country, I need to apply for a visa. How long is it going to take? Please forget it. I'll go to a place where we're not going to pay visas. So as airlines, we have seen the development of 5 African countries, only 5, that allow fellow Africans to come visa-free. And those countries have recorded year on year on year growth and development in double digits in terms of the number of African visitors. And don't forget that in as much as we have Africans that are now living in the diaspora, and most of them have acquired citizenship of the diaspora, they still have their African identity. And when they travel on the African continent, they want to be able to identify as Africans. So as airlines, we are very, very clear in terms of we only fly to where, number one, there is minimal restrictions to our customers being able to fly to.
Thank you, Aaron. I think, flowing from that, in Rwanda, you are one of the countries that allows, all Africans to enter without requiring a visa. How has that assisted Rwanda in the space that you're in? Be it events or any other business tourism or leisure tourism, how has that impacted Destination Rwanda? By just doing that, gesture of saying every African can travel to Rwanda visa-free. How has that helped the destination?
Thank you. I'm from one of the 5 countries you mentioned, so from Rwanda. The new visa regime, as it's called, it has really impacted the destination in general by becoming a preferred destination. I will ride on what he just mentioned. When you're about to choose where to go, there is a couple of things you check. So the airline, visa, accommodation, it's like a checklist. So, and one of the most complicated elements on that checklist for most of the Africans is visa. So if you have a country like Rwanda where you just need to decide on when you want to fly, pick your ticket, and just come and collect your visa on arrival, it makes a huge difference because that barrier is already removed in terms of what you have to prepare for. But that goes beyond just one individual traveling. Now it comes, let's say, to the event sector where I work from. So when an event is about to choose a destination, you're probably going to have participants from 120 countries wanting to attend your event. So you have to choose the least complicated destination in terms of visa for your delegates. Now, I can say, proudly, Rwanda is the second destination, Kigali is the second destination in the MICE sector on the continent. That's something that has happened over the last, I think, 3, 4, 5 years. We were not even ranked among the top 5. Now we are the second one. If you see the number of sports events that are happening in Rwanda has increased because when it comes to a sports event, you have the teams, you have the fans, you have the sponsors. You want to take them to a destination where they can fly easily and they can access the country easily. And whenever those people come, it's money coming to the economy. It's the country's brand being shared globally. So I would say that it's something which I have seen personally because of being in the industry. And it's something that even people who have come to Rwanda can testify that it makes a huge difference. It does impact the guest, but also it does impact the destination positively and in a very remarkable way.
We can see clearly that Rwanda is winning, from what you said, that you have moved from events point of view, you're hosting more events, you're doing more things. The big question here, Elsie, I'm coming to you. Are we using visa requirements as a diplomatic tool? Are we negotiating through, our foreign policy through the use of restrictions or the easing of restriction, from the visa point of view? As an example, if I like you as a country, then I'm going to ease a little bit of travel. I'm going to switch on a little bit and say, yeah, you can travel. Are we using that as African countries as a tool for diplomacy? And if so, why? If not, then why do we still have, this type of barriers?
I think to ride on what Aaron said earlier, it is like this invisible barrier that it's there. But we all know that countries, when it comes to visa, a lot of countries operate on what we call the reciprocity basis. If you open your border to me, I open mine to yours. But we've seen, as he rightly said, countries that have opened up not only to all African countries. I look at a particular case, Seychelles, for example, is open to every country. So when we talk about the reciprocity, it's there, yes, but that discussion between governments must happen. And we all know that the issue of visa goes beyond that, because then you have the topic of security that comes in. So again, as you rightly said, to use it as a diplomacy, it's happening already, but countries need to move beyond that, because we need to see what economic benefits also and gains it will bring to not only the country, the continent. And as Madame said, it's also related not to just the movement of people, but the goods and services. If we want to have this, unlock this situation of trading between countries, we need to go beyond that. And I think this is what those countries have started to do. And we must look at beyond where we are today from when we were maybe post-COVID. If you look at the visa openness report that is done by the African Development Bank, it shows you that it has picked up. It has gone up, and it shows that countries are moving to that direction, but the barriers will still be there. But that discussion between countries and also the international organizations that work to advocate and help to overcome such barriers. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, speaking of the report, the visa openness report for Africa, I see that there has been an improvement in 2023. And if you look at visa-free travel, I think there's about 48 out of 54 countries currently offer visa-free entry privilege to citizens of at least one other country. So it looks like we're just moving at a snail pace. And when I look at the goals of Africa Continental Free Trade Area, all these ambitions, the movements of goods and everything that has to do with it. The economic impact, just touch on that, for us. Because Elsia did talk about, the fact that they're using it as a diplomatic tool, but without looking at the economic impact. And we see this in many countries where, the state security would say, no, we don't want citizens of this country because, there may be problematic people who enter the country. From the economic point of view, if, African Continental Free Trade Agreement is to be successful, if we were to create jobs, how would this, from continental point of view, how would this play out? Should we, move faster than what we're doing at the moment?
Thank you very much, moderator, for that question. Yes, definitely we should move faster. I think we said yesterday we each have our own respective roles to play. The Secretariat has its own role to play, then governments have its own role to play, and also in essence, immigration also has its own role to play in terms of facilitating inter-African trade. Just to go back on your issue, the economic impact of, for example, having visa openness or reduced restrictions, we're talking about boosting trade and investment. Once again, trade is intrinsically linked to the movement of persons. If you look at what Mr. Aaron had given a great example of, the kind of policies Mauritius had, even in the visa index that has been done by FDB, they actually note if you compare Mauritius and Seychelles, Seychelles has always had visa openness for African countries. Mauritius, on the other hand, perhaps still has some restrictions on that. But if you look at the growth rate of their economies, Seychelles has been growing about 7% every year, while the other side of it is that if you do put in place policies that do not really support investment or support the movement of persons, it will, at the end of the day, affect or impact your economic contributions. So we're talking, even when we're talking about investment, when we're talking about the foreign investors need some flexibilities when it comes to visa openness. We always, every time we go to forums, we're always told about the story of Aliko Dangote, and he's talked about the issues he's faced across the continent. And so at the Secretariat now, and even the AFCFTA Protocol on Trading Services recognizes the importance of ensuring that investors are able to move from one country to another. So if you look at one of the categories we have business visitors, for example. So we have encouraged countries to outline the conditions of entry and also the periods of stay. As you rightly noted, it's still a very slow-paced process because, as also Madam and the other panelists have noted, there are sensitivities around the issue of visa openness. There's issues of security that countries call upon. There's also issues of infrastructure that we have. But nonetheless, it is progressing, and I would like to at least indicate to the audience that we are doing some work in terms of that, in terms of at least trying to address issues of transparency. In terms of more even beyond economic contribution, we are talking about addressing issues of capacity gaps and skill development and knowledge transfer. Essentially, the movement of persons is linked, for example, to the issue of addressing capacity gaps between the countries. So, for example, if your country does not have service providers in this particular sector, for example, marine insurance, and you're looking to another country that has exceptional insurance services on the continent, you do need to put in place specific policies that that support the movement of those professionals from one country to another. So if you do look at the schedules that we have in terms of the 22 countries with state parties, you will see to a certain extent they've highlighted the conditions of entry. They've also highlighted the periods of stay for all these different categories in order to facilitate service providers. And again, the principle of reciprocity is core here, because if you see some differences in some countries where they've not really opened up, but in some countries they recognize the potential of actually opening up the sector in terms of the economy. So that is perhaps the economic impact of the movement of persons if we have more openness on the continent. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's very clear from what you're saying that the benefits are quite there, are clear. Aaron, in the aviation space, in the world where you need visa, and you go and apply, you need to book a ticket before you even apply to show where you are going. You need to book a hotel to show where you're going to stay. You may be required to give your bank statement, and who knows, your blood test, and scan your lungs and many other things. The speed in which countries issue visas or don't issue visas, how does that impact aviation? Given, the context that I've given. You already booked your seat, you're going to country B, and they don't issue a visa. What is the impact on airlines?
So you are so right, Chief Yua, because we can talk about everything else, but we are not addressing the real issue. The real issue is the mere fact that the first thing that comes to your mind is, I have to apply for a visa. Already, it's a disincentive for you to travel to that country, whether you like it or not. The mere fact that the first thing that you think about is, I have to apply for a visa, it actually acts as a disincentive. It's a negative scorecard that you have to start dealing with. As opposed to when you are going to a place where you know you don't need a visa, there is already a positive impact that is coming to you because there's no restriction. They want me to come to their country. So for us as airlines, one of the biggest criteria that we use when we decide on which destination to fly to is, number one, who are our customers? Once we have an ideal customer profile, then we superimpose it on the destination and we say, if we are targeting Africans to fly on our aeroplane to an African destination, and that African destination has stringent visa restrictions, we put a cross on it and we say, let's look for another destination. Simple and straightforward. Because I have personally gone to countries where I have spoken to ministers and sometimes to presidents, and I've told them that the people that you are refusing entry into your country are the bona fide business and tourism customers that you want. The ones that you think you don't want to come are already in your country. How on earth can you ask Aliko Dangote to apply for a visa to come to your country? Do you think Aliko Dangote is going to abscond in your country? That's madness. So as airlines, we don't miss around because an aircraft is a very expensive real estate. That real estate only makes money for us when it's up in the air. And it can't be up in the air when it is empty. It has to be... Yes, clap your hands, please. Yeah, well, release the air. Because once it's up in the air, it has to have passengers and cargo. And passengers and cargo, unlike most people think that cargo doesn't talk, cargo actually speaks louder than passengers. Because cargo is about trade. And we trade amongst ourselves. Yes, MasterCard, yeah. And we only trade with people and countries that want to do trade with us. So the other day, Chifiwa, I was watching a movie called One Love, story about Bob Marley. And there's a particular element where he spoke about some people are so poor, all they have is money. Yeah, some people are so poor, all they have money. And it actually resonated with me as an airline person that some countries are so poor in their policies, all they have is visa.
So let's dig a little bit deeper into this. What motivated Rwanda to go visa-free? What was the big motivation? Because everyone else, we've been talking about this subject for quite a number of years, and we need to get to some level of solution. What motivated Rwanda to go into the space where they say, well, we are open, everyone can come?
Thank you. Sorry. I think it's about a visionary leadership. That's what I can say as number one. Because if you say that you want to be a continent that is growing and you want to be a country that is developing, you cannot develop by closing your borders. It doesn't make sense. I'm not on the political side or on the security side, so I cannot talk about, the motivations on that side, but I'll talk on the business side. There is a very practical example the fellow panelists mentioned, and the person himself, Aliko Dangote, did mention this in May. He was in Kigali for a conference. He said that he has to apply for 35 visas in Africa. So he needs visa to go to 35 countries in Africa, he needs visa. This is the richest man on the continent saying that. Now, someone from a country B somewhere on those countries, I don't want to mention any name, but on other continents, if an individual from that country whose title or position is job seeker, he's looking for a job, he's unemployed in other words, he wants to come to Africa, probably to get a job in one of the factories belonging to Dangote. He comes with no visa requirements. He just picks his passport and goes to Africa. He accesses with no visa. So does that make sense in some of the situations? To me, it doesn't make sense. So if you're refusing access to the richest man to come to your country, but you're allowing a job seeker from another continent to come to your country without visa, so I think it's an element of unfairness or lack of understanding of where we want to go. So it's very critical that we really have open discussions and say, what is this visa story? One of the panelists said it. I think visa, it's something we inherited from the past. It's not something that used to exist on the continent. If you read about the history, movement between countries or territories by that time was free. People were trading, the traditional trading, and easily moving between countries. But now something called a visa has been put in place. Me from Rwanda to come to Botswana, I need a visa. Yes. Someone, I will have to mention a country, sorry. Someone from France to come to Botswana doesn't need a visa. How do we explain this? So just one additional point. Now talking from the business perspective, I was reading about, there is a big event that happens globally called the World Youth Day. It's a Catholic event where the Pope meets the youth from all over the world. In 2016, I think 2016 or 2013, it happened in Brazil. They had 3.5 million visitors, 3.5 million visitors that came to attend that event. Half of those people came from other countries. Let's say probably 500,000 of them flew in Brazil. My colleague from the airline industry, if you do 500,000 people and the airport taxes on those people, it's a fortune. If those people, even if they were asked to apply for visa, but get it on arrival, even if a visa was, let's say, $10, 500,000 people times $10. For a destination, you can see how much money they just make by allowing people to come, even if you ask them to pay for a visa, but there is a policy and there is a structure that works. So I think there is need of moving beyond what is a visa. A visa is a stamp, but how do people get that stamp and what can a country benefit by making it easier? Thank you.
Thank you. So we're going to be wrapping up. If there are questions, we will take those. You can raise your hand and they will look for you. But before we get into the questions, does it mean, because we've got all these visa restrictions, that we don't trust each other as African countries? Does it mean that we don't trust the passports from Rwanda or from Burundi, from anywhere else? I mean, we've got African Union, we've got all these regional bodies that we have. Is there a trust deficit between ourselves as 54 countries in Africa that's making us to put all these restrictions amongst each other? And it's a question for everyone.
So definitely there's a lack of trust. I don't even want to mince my words and say a trust deficit. There's a lack of trust. We don't trust each other. How do you explain that as of 2023, yes, 28 countries in Africa allow Africans to arrive and get a visa on arrival. 28 countries. Only 5 of the 55 countries in Africa allow fellow Africans to arrive without a visa, and you don't need a visa to get into that country. Out of a continent of 55. Compare that with the Europeans. There's only 27 of them. Only 27 European countries, and they travel across the width and breadth of Europe without need for a visa. There is definitely a lack of trust, number one. Number two, I think there is a deficit of leadership on the continent. Our leaders are not thinking the right way. They are thinking just internally. And for me, that's the biggest challenge. My constituency is there with me. So I think for me, Chifiwa, the solution is very simple. Africa for Africans by Africans, end of story. If you're an African, you carry an African passport, you go anywhere in Africa without need for, and I can assure you, Chifiwa, the most stringent visa process that you can ever go through is on the African continent. It's amazing. You want to apply for an American visa, you apply. As long as you qualify, you get a visa. End of story. But on the African continent, I've been to a country not once, not twice, 11 times. And every time I go to that country, the only thing they don't ask for is my great-grandmother's DNA. Everything else, they ask for it. I've been to your country 11 times. I go and I come out, and you still want me to apply for a visa? That's absurdity.
So we're still taking questions, maybe 2 questions, if not 3. But if you want to add into that, feel free to add. There's some few questions this side, and I see also this side. Go ahead.
Hi. On. Hello. Okay. There. It seems on. So I understand. We talked a lot about openness, and I know we've done some work in this arena as BDO, and it's definitely the case studies are there. If you open, the markets grow faster. I think from a tourism point of view, we are all sold on that factor. But the issue obviously doesn't sit in tourism. It sits at Home Affairs, it sits in other areas, and with other departments in making decisions. So while the dream is openness, and we all want to work towards that, in the meantime, I think there's a big issue with efficiency of when we have to do the visa, and which we can still make it a lot better, etc. And I just want to know from the ACFTA and from UN Tourism, if there's work being done that looks at capacity across borders, across different countries, helping them actually just improve this so it can be done faster, so you can actually get your visa before you need to actually get into the country. And we don't just lose the people we really need to get because of that efficiency.
Let's take 2 more questions.
Yes. Good morning to everyone. My name is Yasir Muhammad. I'm from Somalia, but I'm based in Rwanda. And I have 2 comments I would like to add to the discussion this morning. Yes, I agree on the issue of visa traveling within Africa. But there is an issue also we would like to highlight, which is the transit visa. For example, coming to Botswana, some airlines I have to transit to South Africa. I have to get visa for transit. That means coming to Botswana, I have to apply for visa for Botswana, and I have to apply for South Africa also. So there is a bigger issue than getting a visa for one country. There is an issue for transit also. So I think we need to highlight that one also. Okay. And the other thing is, when we discuss about the issue of visa, we have to educate our immigration officials also. So getting visa, it's frustrated. Air connectivity is another issue. Someone coming from West Africa has to go to East Africa. in order to come to another country in South Africa. So once you arrive at the airport, the immigration officers, they don't know nothing about tourism, selling the country. So you feel like a small kid who come late to the class. Go there, come here, do this, don't do that. Did you fill the form? Go here and there. So I think it has to be a parallel to train the immigration officials also in order to have a standard service within the continent.
Okay,
The
thank
last
you.
point I would like to add, if you don't mind.
We're running out of.
Since I'm based in Rwanda, I would like to agree with my colleague, Chris. I'm running business in Rwanda. Rwanda, it's the best example for the rest of Africa. We don't have to go around. We don't have to go around and find an issue. How can we get the solution? The solution is there. We should go and learn from Rwanda.
Yeah, no.
Simple as that. It's the mindset of the leadership, the mindset of the people, and the policy of the country has taken us Africans as the priority.
Thank you. Thank you. There's hand there and the last hand at the back, and then we'll give the answers and the way forward
Right.
in terms of what is it that we need to do as this forum to advance, these issues forward. So the hand here and the hand at the back.
And also, if you allow me, Mr. Moderator, there's also a few questions that came through our virtual audience as well.
Yes.
So if you give me a little bit of time, I should also be able to take you through them.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll get to those ones.
Thanks.
Okay, let's keep them to the point, straight to the point, so that we can, wrap up.
Good morning, everyone. Stage director giving me instructions. Perhaps a little unfair for the panel, but the question is, do African countries actually make money from visas? Is this a revenue generation issue? And if so, is there other ways that they can make up the deficit so that we can actually move away from this visa scenario for Africans? Thank you.
Thank you. The last question at the back before we get to the online.
Thank you, Chief. My name is Nelly Swankani. I was the hub head for South African tourism, as you know, for 6 years based out of India. And I think, Aaron, we had this conversation. I had the privilege to be the sandwich between tourism and visas. Does anybody know what the cost of an avocado is in India? Right? 150 rands. One. Why? Trade and investment and visa. Mpumalanga produces some of the best avocados, but to buy it and get it into India is 150. Impediment, visa. Just an avocado. So you can imagine what as an expat you spend your money on. Secondly, Africa visa. Grant me the visa. We're the only continent, I would like to be corrected, but I can speak about South Africa. I get my visa, I get into a hotel, nobody scans my visa. I go to India, Taj, I've paid my $15,000, they will not accept me without a visa. But we in Africa accept people without a visa. Or we accept people with a visa, but we don't scan it so that we deal with the people that we say are illegal. Digitization, visa, critical. Lastly, can we have in the next one, CEO of this forum, of this organization, the departments of ministers, departments of home affairs, the tourism ministers, and the Department of Trade. Reason is, we will continue to talk visas until we're blue and green. The policymakers should be in this room. We should tell them what it means for employment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's answer some of the questions. Some of them were comments, but let's answer some of the questions, and then we're going to take the online. How many do we have online? Okay, let's go through to the online, then we can answer everything and wrap up. Go ahead, from the online.
Okay, so we have a question from Mambo Ndema. Says, how plausible, viable, and feasible will it be for an AFCFTA visa in terms of movement of persons for trade and tourism amongst the 55 African countries? Another one comes from Lamin Drame. It says, will the visa-free enable reduction of airfares by airlines? It is almost twice expensive to travel within Africa than Africa to Europe. The last one is coming from Nicole Jones, says, from Kenya, and we can access East African community and Southern African communities visa-free. The problem comes in when you're traveling to some of the countries by land. Sometimes you encounter border frustrations and bribery, even though it is visa-free. A good one is Malawi border. How do you deal with this, as most travelers will rather skip Malawi for such frustrations and opt for Zimbabwe? Even South Sudan is another one. How can we minimize and do away with bribery at the points of entry now that we're talking borderless Africa?
Thank you very much. To the panelists, you had the questions. You can tackle the ones that you can tackle, and then we can wrap up.
Okay, so I think, yes, once we have visa-free travel across the African continent, definitely the airfares will come down, because competition becomes the enabler. When there's competition for customers, definitely the prices will come down. In terms of income from visas, Bali, yes, African countries actually sustain their diplomatic missions through the visa fees that they collect. As sad as it is, but that's the reality. But what they don't understand is that if they do away with visas, the country's economy actually grows much bigger than what they pay for their diplomatic missions. And the last one is, I think when you talk about transit visas and you talk about educating the visa official, the Department of Immigration officials, you have hit the nail on the head. That's where it is most important. If we do not educate our leaders, and I am talking of prime ministers and presidents, for them to first understand that they cannot be a country on their own without everybody else, then it trickles down to the rest of the departments and the government officials. That's what we need to start with.
Thank you very much to the audience members for your questions. I'll start with the first question on capacity across border, and just to bounce on what Mr. Aaron has also said about the need to capacitate the people at the borders. Yes, at the AFCFTA, we do have a program for that in terms of making sure that the knowledge or even the policies that we have are trickled down to the people who are actually implementing them. So we have, for particularly speaking on protocol on trading services, where we've done negotiations on the movement of natural persons, service providers, particularly in the tourism sector. We have put in place the Guided Trade Initiative on Services, which seeks to domesticate the current commitments we have. So it's still at its very early preliminary stages, but we are developing a program on the movement of persons, which will include key elements on capacity building and knowledge transfer, particularly linking with the different immigration and other various infrastructure. Because at this particular moment, the AFCFTA is confined, of course, to the ministries of trade, but there is an element of how we're trying to link up with the other Home Affairs and also immigration, through the work also the African Union Commission is doing. In terms of the possibility of having an AFCFTA visa, it's definitely a possibility in the sense, particularly for service providers, which is the work that we're doing. So we can try to see the possibilities and carry out a situational analysis to include in the work program of movement of persons. Because there's already work that is being done at the African Union Commission to have the AU passport. So we're trying to see the complementarities of not trying to duplicate the process, but to see how to effectively implement the AU passport. So I think there was also another question I would like to answer on, if do people allow me, on the need to have the policymakers in the conversation. We completely agree with that. So I want to stress that on the 18th and 19th, we have a regional stakeholder meeting on tourism services, which I would like to encourage all of you to attend. This is a formal meeting of the AFCFTA. So any response that you provide during the meeting, we can actually take it up. And I would also like to say that even some of those policy makers, the trade negotiators on services with regards to movement of persons, will be part of this meeting. So it will be really, really important for them to hear from the private sector perspective, and it's not really necessarily an AFCFTA Secretariat perspective. So if you say that you have issues on visa, you want to open more, they will definitely hear you. And then this will now be translated to having key policies, and even it will give us an opportunity to include them in the work program. So I just wish to encourage all of you to attend. So I will provide the QR codes on the different registration booths where you can get more information on how to register for the meeting. It's virtual, so all of you are invited to attend. Thank you very much, moderator and audience. Thank you.
Any more comments? Elshia, Christian?
Just to add on what my colleague said, also as a UN agency, as I said at the beginning, a lot of our work is based on advocacy, working with the different associations. Also, we participate, for example, in the different workshops that AFCAC has been doing recently, for example, with AFRA as well. And in 2019, we managed, because one lady, she mentioned about bringing the policymakers and the decision makers together. And that's how, with the support of ICAO, we were able to bring ministers of tourism as well as ministers of transport together to be able to look at these topics that we are discussing. And now the intention is to run a second program in regards on this. But what came out of that very first time that we were able to bring ministers of transport and tourism together was a clear action plan. But of course, the actions that you will put there, you need the countries also to pick it up and implement it with the support of the different associations that are there. So it's an ongoing work, but as we've all been discussing, it takes more than just the work that is being done. By countries, there must be first and foremost that political will. You talk about trust deficit, but if there is not that political will from the top and to recognize the economic value that this sector brings to a country, then we will continue to discuss. Thank you.
Thank you. Christian?
Thanks. Just to two quick points. I think I second the idea of having policymakers, experts in border control to join maybe the next edition, because these are people who can tell us really, is visa helping in controlling border control or accessing, which I don't think is really, but it would be good to have the experts talk about it. The economic or the financial deficit on the visa side, I personally don't agree with it, because I think there are many ways countries can make money, even by making the visa process smooth and easier, even if you have to pay, but let it be smooth and be accessible. There is a country in Africa where you have to pay $100 and something to make biometrics for visa. I won't mention the name, but why really? So I think let's learn from each other. My colleague mentioned about Rwanda. It's happening. We see the benefits. So why can't other countries learn from where things are happening and make it easier for Africa? And that's the only way to move forward.
Thank you very much. And thank you to the panelists. This is not an easy topic to discuss. And I'm just going to ask, as we wrap up, that maybe as part of the resolution, from this forum, I'm a little bit of an activist at heart. Perhaps we need to, have a position for the private sector within the African continent when it comes to the issues of, visas. And if we need to approach the African Union or the regional bodies, I believe we do so as a private sector, as part of, trying to solve this matter, because we can talk about it year after year after year. As you've said, you need a political will, and you need to be able to push, the political buttons, from the private sector point of view. So maybe as part of the resolution, we table it there. I surely will be there. If we go to African Union, we can go and present there and make some noise, in those chambers. Aaron wants to have the last word.
I think what I want to say is controversial, but it's got to be said. Let's start by agreeing that the first people that we are going to deny visas are ministers. Then we'll get visa free, I can tell you now.
There you have it. Thank you very much.
Another round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, for Chifiwa and his panelists. I'm sure it was a very insightful conversation that was had there. I really liked, the strong points that came out and the standpoints really that came out from that panel. I'm sure that, things will then be taken up from here. I'm very particularly excited about the fact that, one of our thematic areas or some of our thematic areas for this conference is actually inclusiveness, sustainability, and cooperation. And I'm sure that you got that as keywords from the panel discussion that was had just here. I am asked, ladies and gentlemen, to remind you to take pictures. I've seen a few of our participants take pictures outside, and we are implored to post on social media and use the hashtag ATLF2024 and in Chifiwa's words, so that those that are watching could actually feel like they are missing out a great deal. So please, let's be encouraged to take those pictures and use that there hashtag. Without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, we move on to the next panel discussion. That'll be looking at what hotel and hospitality investors and financiers would like to know. This is beyond the pitch now, and I'd like to welcome the moderator for this here panel. He is the Vala Hospitality as head of strategy. He is Robin Williams. Please, let's welcome him to stage with a round of applause.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm going to be introducing the panel now. So let's start with Christelle Groman, Director with BDO. Please come up. So as advisors, they deal with a range of different investors and financiers and that. So she's going to bring us a nice broad perspective to the discussion. Then I've got Lasse Restalainen. He's Development Principal at Casada Capital Management. Thank you. They have one of the biggest investors in hotels in Africa, so another good perspective from an investor side, and also some potentially interesting prospects coming along, so hopefully we'll hear something about that, see what we can fly out of him. And then we've got Hamza Faruqi, who is joining us online. I'm not sure where to look for, where do I look to be speaking to him? Oh, up, okay. Sorry, Hamza. Hamza Faruqi is founder and CEO of Millat Group. They've got a growing hotel investment platform there, but very much focused on South Africa. So I was going to say that hopefully our hosts and neighbors will inspire him, but unfortunately he's not with us today in person. And then we've got Mokoena Morilane, CEO of Cresta Hotels. There we go. Botswana's very own, so welcome. and giving some good perspective from the operator side. So let me go. Oh, there we go. Cool. Welcome. Thanks to my panel for being here and joining us online. I think each of the panelists have quite an extensive bio of experience in the hospitality investment space, and I'm not doing it justice by going into that bio for each of you. I think that that experience is really amazing, but I also think that the real seeds for Africa's market growth, the future growth for the tourism market and the hospitality market are actually in the audience. I think the ideas, the new ways of doing things, that comes from the guys that are the entrepreneurs, the guys working on the ground with people directly in the markets and living the tourism life on the ground. I think that's where the ideas come, that's where the real growth comes. So I think what's important to me, and I'd like to encourage the panelists to keep this in mind, is that we are here to help them to understand the process that we've learned from a lot of experience and our own lessons learned from difficulties and that. And I think here, this is our opportunity to share the kind of questions that we've learned from that experience, and try and look at it from the perspective of those guys that haven't necessarily been in the deal making and the operations as some of us have been. So I think that's my focus, and if we can just have a discussion, I don't want it to be question answer, and I'm not going to talk too much longer. So just to get us started, I'm going to start, Lasse. I'm going to ask you, and just get straight to the point. Okay, theoretically, say I come to you, I'm going to say to you, I've got an amazing hotel investment opportunity for you. It's a existing hotel in Africa. You get to ask me 3 questions, only 3 questions, and then you have to decide whether you're going to invest in it. What are those 3 questions?
Oh dear, put me on a spot here. Well, firstly, I think by now you realize that Robin is she, not he. So let's take this off the table. Well, look, I'm not here to necessarily pitch about Cassara as a company, but and I'm not drumming my chest, but we are the largest Pan-African investor into hospitality. We're at 20 hotels across various sectors, various segments, and we're present in 8 different jurisdictions. So it's quite an accomplishment within the last 5 years or so. So we've turned a lot of stones to find a few diamonds. So I think, yeah, I probably do speak from experience. I think the first thing, it's not the first question that I would ask them, but if you do approach us, or if you do approach any investor, I think it makes sense to do a little bit of research as to understand what this particular investor is looking for. Like, not all investors are the same. And look, we're a public company, we institutional investor. I mean, it's pretty well known what we're sort of targeting. So that little bit of homework, just going on our website and looking at the type of investments we have made, I mean, that would probably save a lot of time, right? It saves your time, and we're quite precious with ours, right? So I think the first question would be the size of the deal, right? So that's important. Size of the deal, I mean, if it's a one single asset, right? I mean, it's, well, I'll take it back, right? Because we are both, we invest both in existing assets as well as into greenfield developments. Look, our fund was set up in 2019, and you know what happened in 2020, right? We had a mandate. We still obviously have a mandate, but that changed quite a bit, right? So instead of focusing a lot on investing into greenfield developments, we just ended up buying assets. And it's not just that, you know, we suddenly were, you know, lucky to have lots of great value buys, but one of our mandate is, a clear mandate is to be a solution provider. So we acquired assets which were in trouble, and doing that, I think we added to the industry a lot across the continent, right? So the size of the hotel, one thing, what's the size, and if it's something that is scalable, right? I mean, if it's an investment which you can replicate across the continent, right? So the fact is that investing into a project which is, you know, $10 million versus $100 million, the background work to us is quite similar. So, you know, even though the smaller investment may have a higher return, it may be better for us to do something which is a bit more bigger because just for the efficiency of it, right? And second question, I mean, very simple question, right? So, where is it? So, obviously, being a Pan-African investor, we have our sort of locations of preference, right? Geographical sort of risk dilution is important. So we got to make sure that we're not too concentrated in one single market. As I already mentioned, we're in 8 jurisdictions, and which complicates things. But it's important from the risk diversification perspective. I've been on the continent for a good 13 years, and I know that, you know, whenever East does good, West maybe not so good, South is somewhere in the middle, and it just sort of like rotates, right? So building a portfolio, that risk diversification is important, right? So, and the other thing, I mean, this is because we are mainly so far been investing into existing hotels. I mean, out of the 20 hotels, 20 hotels and hotel projects, there's only a couple of them greenfield. So mainly focusing on existing stuff. What's the value creation angle in there, right? So is there something, if you're selling an asset to us, have a clear understanding of what this asset, obviously you should know what it has been doing, what do you believe it will be doing, and based on based on what? And look, that's not the first question, and I think deliberately I didn't say it from the get-go, is that what's the pricing, right? So pricing is one element, but it's not the only one.
I think you got past the 3 now. Thank you. No, and of course it makes a difference that you got my endorsement of the project, right? So yes, it will be a yes in the end, right? My ego aside, that is an important part of the decision, I think, as well, is to understand the people involved. And you get a lot of partnerships, not necessarily partnerships, but you get advisors, developers, financiers, project promoters that you kind of have dealt with. An investor, financier will know, okay, they've dealt with those people in the past. They know from experience, they can trust what they bring to the table. And I think that's quite an important part of these deals as well. And I think the problem, and I think what a lot of people will then want to know, well, if those partnerships are already strong and in place, how do you break into working with people that are actually have their kind of set advisors and partners in place? And I think I'm going to ask Hamza a question on that. I think just as an example on the partnership thing is that with Hamza having a lot of your properties are Hyatt branded properties, and I think that's kind of part of that partnership mentality where you know what you're dealing with, and you know what they bring to the table. And using that as an example, but in the broader sense, Hamza, what do you think, how would you advise somebody to be able to step into a space where there are so many partnerships? How can somebody, the new guy, come in and find a space in creating those partnerships and getting involved and getting the investment?
So I think it's relationship? How is that relationship going to be structured in the most efficient, prudent, and thoughtful fashion? I think we're also living in an era today where the brands want thoughtful jockeys. The day where they just have one or two owners, trophy owners are gone. So I think those are very important things. And I would say that start that value proposition with where the customer is. So if you have a piece of land which is on the banks of some of the most finest overlooking areas, that's great. Who is going to come? Understand who that customer is. And I think when you understand and answer that question very well, then you can understand where and what brands are going to be fitting in. We are very confident and very grateful for the relationship that we have with Hyatt, because we believe what the brand drives from a premium new market works. If you look at most of the large American brands, Hyatt globally has positioned itself in a very unique space in the sort of upper leisure, higher end rate optimized market. Many of the other brand players have lots of brands to offer. So I think it's a very careful consideration when you start looking at brand. But I would say in a one word, who is your customer? Where is the demand generation going to come from? And where's the best way for me to get it? And I think that's the best place to start.
Great. I think also linking that to something Lasse said as well about actually understanding the investor. I mean, for them in those specific situations, for Hamza, the specific situations, certain brand works for them. But I think there's often a mentality, just find a specific, some brand is perfect, or some developer is the right one, or some advisor, or some operator. And I think there's a lot more. It comes down to that research as well. Understand where you fit and who the right partners are before you just try and connect with absolutely anybody. And then you are going to be spending a lot of time and not getting very far until you find that one person. Hamza, I'm going to still stick with you with the next one, and it's the same question as what I asked Lasse as well. 3 questions. I'm coming to you. I say there's a hotel investment opportunity in Africa. What are the 3 key questions you're going to ask me that I need to be prepared to answer before you can make a yes/no call?
So 3 things. Question number 1, macro. Where's the destination? Where's the airlift? Where's the demand generation? What's the long-term view on the country? Where's this hotel located? And so I would first start with macro. I'll then get into the micro, whereas what's the offering? Where is that business mix sitting, and what does that opportunity look like? And 3, who is my operating sort of partner? What is the operating capability? And I think if an individual has those 3 things curated, you know where your market is, where your business is, you understand how to operate it, then I think you're in a position to tap into, I think, any kind of capital. There is, I think, a very common statement I make. Capital is challenging in Africa. That's why platforms like Casada, us as a privately held vehicle, do get opportunities, but also it is something where it's a growing challenge, because the availability of capital make it even more challenging for entrepreneurs to make sure they're very crisp in what they're positioning, in making sure that they understand these 3 areas thoroughly, whether it's through them or their advisors. But if you as a jockey or as an entrepreneur don't understand that in completeness, talking about it is one thing, but if you don't sort of have that at a level of depth, then I think there's a serious issue. So I think those 3 things are very important: the macro, the sort of micro part, where that business fits, and then sort of the operations execution capability.
Cool, thank you. And I think, Mokoena, I think something you can bring into this is obviously you have different kind of partnerships as well, and you deal a lot with the government investor side of things. And I'm just interested to hear what kind of different kind of questions, because they do hold different priorities. Obviously, there's the financial things, similar kind of thing to the private equity, the financial questions. But from their different priority perspective, what kind of questions can anybody here expect from a government investor?
No, thanks for that. Good day, everyone. Just a little bit about who we are. We are Cresta Hotels, so we've got 11 hotels in Botswana, 5 hotels in Zimbabwe, and then 1 hotel in South Africa, Cape Town. So we, as a group, we've got 17 hotels. We are growing in Africa. We took a bold decision during COVID 2021 to enter the South African market, Cape Town, and it has been doing very well for us as a group. In Botswana, we believe that COVID will come to an end. We developed 2 hotels during COVID. We opened one in the diamond capital of Jwaneng, the city of Jwaneng. So that was opened this year in June. Last year in December, we also had another hotel that we opened in Botswana, in Mahalape, a 60-bed hotel. So in terms of what people are looking for, investors clearly are looking for a return. Will you get your money back? What are the financial metrics is key. NPV, you're looking for a positive net present value of the investment. You're looking for, typically as an operator, we're looking for an internal rate of return of at least 15%. Payback period, we are looking for, 13 years, because hospitality projects by nature demand that you have patient capital. So you're not going to get your return in the long term. So we have in Botswana a partner in government, in that we are listed in the Botswana Stock Exchange. Our main shareholder, if you like, is the Botswana Development Corporation, the investment arm of government, who owns about 27% of the shares. So clearly, in terms of that investor, their main consideration is clearly, you need to be able to pay them a dividend. You need to be able to grow the capital value of the shares. You need to be able to create employment. So that's another metric that they look at. You have to be able to contribute to communities in which we operate. So we have to consider that. So there are economic metrics that one looks at, and there are also social imperatives that are key. Employment creation from an investor point of view, and also social dynamics in terms of community impact. So that is what the investor will be looking for from a government point of view.
Yeah, no, that's very helpful. And I like how you give some good KPIs on there as well. And I'm going to draw on some of that later on, but I think, Crystal, first of all, I'm going to give you an option to add any other questions that you've seen from different types of investors, but I've got a follow-on question, so this is just an opportunity if you want to add anything.
I think one of the things that we see a lot in undertaking research in the hospitality industry is that the research has changed. It was years ago a lot easier to look at past performance of hotels and apply, specifically if we're looking at the hotel industry, and apply that into what is likely to be the future performance, respective rates, etc. This is no longer the case. I think you need to understand the markets very, very clearly. I think post-COVID, what is opened, what is not opened, what may still come. You need to understand the nuances of the Airbnbs in any of the other niche products on your product. I think that has become far more complicated to understand. I think you need to understand your tourist markets and your source markets and how they behave. And that behavior has become quite different. You look, for instance, at your business market. Definitely there's been a sort of a pinch on traveling less, looking at where you're paying, understanding also if there's internal travel agents and some of the corporates that you work with. So it is actually far more, I think, complex a decision in what is the market. And we see that clearly from investors. I think we also have the frustration that we see, and Casado I think you guys understand because you're very focused and you're a specialist, I guess, investor in hospitality. But when you're going to the general commercial banks and even going to the development corporations, etc., the understanding of the market is, it's very risky. Trying to explain and trying to get through the specifics about one property as opposed to the industry in general, I think there's a lot of education that needs to go into that, and so it's quite a more complex. And I think that communication and I guess education of some of our investors is necessary. I think the gentleman from Cresta spoke about patient capital, and definitely in hotels you need it, whereas some of the indication that we see from, even if the commercial banks will go for it, they want to actually make it shorter because they want to decrease their risk. So they actually want to decrease the loan period, which is you just cannot do with this kind of developments. So it actually just makes it then harder to achieve what they require, and therefore does make it look far more risky than I think it needs to be. And then finally, just the understanding that it is very people-based, but also you as the entity that's going for the investment, understand that you're going to have to do a lot of work. There's a lot of due diligence information that is going to be asked of you. Make sure you've got that ready, because otherwise you look like you don't know what you're doing and you don't know your own entity. And so that when they ask for that information, you can bring it as quickly as possible, which that will just make how they look at your bid or your information or your application, and how fast that can actually move.
Maybe just sort of sum this up. In terms of the greenfield developments, right, you want to make sure that when you're approached and who you're approached by has what is called a bankable document, right? Because we as investors, well, us as Casara, it's a 10-year investment platform. We can extend it for a couple of years. So in order to get into a greenfield development, and particularly so if you're already 5-6 years into the investment period, you just can't afford to take something on like someone's coming to you, I have a nice piece of land, can we do something on it? And it really might be a nice piece of land, but you have no idea what the rights are for the land, what you can build there. If it's a market, you have somewhat limited understanding of the development costs involved. I mean, yeah, when we have a fully fledged team in our platform, we got great investment guys, we got asset managers, we got construction guys. We read the markets day in and day out. So we do understand how the markets are performing. So we're not necessarily, looking into the promoter and saying, okay, how will it do, and take it at the face value. No, we'll do our own analysis. But when we've been approached, we'd like to see that project being at least taken to a certain point, right? Because otherwise the timelines are just going to be, it's just not going to work. And I'll give you an example here, right? 7-8 years ago, I used to work for the Hilton Group. And proud to say that the Hilton Garden Inn was the second deal that I did in Africa. I'm very proud of it. And I'm super happy to be here today because I still haven't seen this asset, because I think the last time that I was here was about 7 years ago. And I think the hotel opened, I understand, in 2019. The first time that a promoter approached me with this opportunity was in 2012, okay? And it opened in 2019. So in Casara, we just can't afford that. It has to be taken way further, for us to take this on, no matter how attractive it may look on paper.
So
I think I'm going to open this up a bit though, but Crystal, I want to ask you, get your opinion first. So just let's get it down to kind of, I don't know how to put it, grassroots or something. There are people out there, there's somebody that might own a piece of land. There's somebody that they live in the area, they are working in the tourism industry in that area, they know what the market needs. They can go off, so number one lesson, research. Know who you're dealing with, know who you want to deal with, and know what the opportunities are. But once they get to that point, you can't just walk into CASADA's offices and say, we want $100 million, or it's most likely not even $100 million, which means it might not be at your level. It might not be something we can go to Cresta ads and we say, this is great, we want your brand on it. What is their, I mean, you having seen obviously from the study side, they don't have equity to put in thousands of dollars of a fully fledged bankable document and go to banks. What can they do? What is that next step? How do they get to the point where they are in the offices with the right people, with the money, to be able to actually move these great ideas into action?
So, I mean, there are entities that you can go to that will help with feasibility studies, but that often puts you into a very specific approach in respect of where you're going to get the funding at the end of the day. And it also can influence what you and I, we always say that, you know, if you look at certain investors, they want to go into certain markets, or they may say to you, no, we think this is a 3-star property, but you are convinced it must be a 5-star. So you need to have that research in place so that you can be able to have those arguments and know what it is that you want to do. Also, sometimes an investor does, you know, everybody likes the sexy. They don't like that it doesn't look so sexy on paper. So everybody wants to often be a 5-star and etc. So sometimes you need to also, as the promoter, listen to what the information, you must be able to open that up. Unfortunately, I think in reality, you're going to have to find that money somewhere to be able to start the process, okay? And if it means, therefore, that you're going to go to an agency that is going to help you to, pay for the feasibility study with the outlook that perhaps they will then fund it, afterwards, that is difficult to get to. And often people feel that those are the developments that are maybe not as fundable, I think, at the end of or bankable at the end of the day. So you also need to be very careful about how you approach that. So it just is a reality. At the moment, getting somebody to listen to you just because it's a good idea, I think, as Lassa says, it's nearly impossible to get that done. You really need to take it a bit further. I think also if you are going into developments such as, let's talk about concessions, where you've got a government partner that you're going to end up with these days. It's also very important that between government and the private parties, they find a balance of what is doable in respect of all the requirements, the KPIs that I think you mentioned, Mokoena, of what you need to go to, as well as what you still need to do to be able to make money, to get the return that you need to get to return. Because sometimes we can, from the government side, actually ask too much. And then it's difficult for the investors to look at it. Other times, and I don't know, maybe Lassa would indicate here, as the investor of splitting the investment to be able to split the risk. I know often they don't want to go too small or too big. You have your point where certain investors like to take an investment size. It may be good to look at that. I know the IDC, for instance, will look at giving you equity components as well as loan financing. Sometimes they may only do the one part, they won't do the other part. It may just be a good way of looking at different ways of getting to the end.
Yeah, so I think again, just to bring it a little bit home, so if you look at the different sectors in terms of hospitality, so you've got the leisure sector and then you've got the business hotel sector. So from a Botswana context, you see over the past few years, there's been quite a huge proliferation of, your pop and mom type setup, especially on the Airbnb space. So there have been quite a lot of rooms that have come into a center such as Gaborone. So that has driven prices down from an ADR point of view, from a RevPAR point of view, and from a profitability point of view. So you've got a lot of entrance into a market which is quite finite in terms of business. And then you've got the leisure market, and we've seen concessions in the Okavango Delta and a lot of Botswana entrepreneurs going into that particular sector. Whereas that has been good because it's a US dollar or a hard currency potential revenue base, but it's got its own unique attributes, and you have to have core competencies around being able to operate in a remote location in the middle of nowhere. So you've got to have the logistical capabilities. How do you actually get your guests there? How do you get your staff there? And it's a hardship area. And then you have high turnover of staff. And also you've got to have the marketing capabilities. How do you then appeal to those people with the hard currency to be able to go to your enterprise? So it might look easy and a low-hanging fruit from the face of it, but once you are in there, it's not so easy. And I think people have to go in there with that particular reality, on the ground. And that's why you've got to do your own research, talk to people that are already in the sector, understand the sector very well, because we've seen some people get banned badly.
No, make some good points there. I know we haven't forgotten Hamza, although I'm not sure if I believe he was going to be leaving early. So is he still on? Do we still have Hamza? No. Okay. I think then I just wanted to, one thing I did want to cover, and coming back to Casada, see if there's any opportunities here for anybody. Lasse, I know that you've mentioned that you guys are kind of exploring, softly exploring maybe different new sectors in the market or slightly different investment opportunities in the market. Maybe if you can just shed briefly, because I'm getting times, just briefly tell us what kind of thing are you looking at, and tell us what kind of new questions are coming up with that, in that exploration. What kind of questions are you coming up with in that process?
Is on? Well, yes. Look, the way the fund works, right? You have a mandate to fill, and that's very clear what we've been filling so far. But obviously, you evolve as the time goes and as the markets evolve, and had this little thing, COVID, in between, so you had to adjust, and we've done it very successfully. We've deployed obviously quite a lot of capital. Like 20-odd properties, and they're all sizable, quite expensive pieces of real estate, right? So we're still going, and plenty to invest. But you need to start looking at other avenues, right? What are the other segments, tourism sectors that might be interesting to you in the future? And there, you're right. I mean, we are sort of exploring. Firstly, we started exploring leisure sector. So far, it's been all about key capital cities, key commercial centers, hotels of at least sort of 150 keys or so, right? And that's what we've been doing so far, and very successfully. Now we started looking at resorts. We do have one resort in our portfolio already, which wasn't in the sort of a initial mandate, but it worked well because within that market we already have 3 hotels, and it's actually it was quite easy, and it totally made sense to diversify a bit, and it's doing phenomenally well. But it wasn't the segment that we anticipated to get into. So we getting comfortable in that space. But the new thing, well, I wouldn't really say a new thing. We're really in an explorative phase. We're quite keen on the sort of a lodges sector, but it's very, very different, right? I mean, these are small units. They're very boutique. They're very scattered. Scalability is something we try to get our head around, whether we can do that. You know, I mean, these are units of sometimes 8 keys or 15 keys, and when you're used to the big boxes, it's a very different business model. You don't, a lot of the times you don't own the land, so how does that work, right? Look, you as an investor, as a investor at the fund level, there's a beginning and the end to this, right? So how are you going to exit this, and based on what sort of cap rates and multiples and so forth. So, but we are open to it. So, I mean, if there's people in this space here, we're very happy to have a conversation. It's not going to be something that we would embark on immediately, but in my capacity within the organization, I sort of look after the early phase opportunities. So I want to make sure when the next big thing happens, we have a good pipeline of opportunities to embark on.
So start researching those lodges, I think. I think we got the right people in the room. I think we might have to start moving to questions shortly, if I'm correct. So, but before we go on to that, there were other questions, and again, there's just not enough time to get into the deep situations that we need to be discussing, and the right people, these people need to be discussing, and we need to be hearing from those in the audience as well. So before we go to the questions, I mean, if there's any key points coming up, but before we go, do you want to add anything, Mokoena?
Yeah, no, thanks, Robin. I think, there's the period before COVID and the period after. Period before COVID, I think financiers were, quite willing and happy to finance hospitality projects. COVID came, and I think the dynamics changed considerably. And unfortunately, at least in this country, I'm not sure about other African markets, you find that decision-making is quite centralized. So a lot of the financial institutions in country will not be able to make decisions unless they refer them to the head office, typically sitting in either Cape Town or Johannesburg. So you find that financing of hospitality project has been squeezed. So that's why now you have maybe private equity coming into play. You have financiers other than your typical banks coming into the picture, and people actually looking deeper in terms of the metrics and whether this thing can pay back and where they actually can get a return. So from an investor point of view, there is the question of yield. What sort of yield am I going to get out of this thing? So typically our operating model as Crest Hotels is to be asset light. So our investors investing in the company don't want to invest in the brick and mortar. So we do have partnerships with developers who then put up the physical infrastructure, and typically we would enter into triple net leases, or just i.e. leases where the lessee, which is ourselves, is an operating lease, and we carry most of the costs in terms of maintenance, taxes and things like that. So it's becoming harder and harder for financiers to finance hospitality projects typically because of the recent history. So developers out there and potential entrants into this market space, it's fraught with difficulties. and things happen. The monkeypox thing, suddenly people are a little bit apprehensive of entering into the sector, dynamics in country in terms of macroeconomic factors. From a Botswana point of view, if diamonds are not being bought as much as they've been bought, so suddenly government, which is a major player in the economy, doesn't have enough money to spend. It's not conferencing, it's not traveling. Remember, again, a lot of business hotel spend is quite discretionary. You can choose to do elsewhere. But having said that, I think the leisure space has opportunities. There are wealthy people out there who are always willing to travel. Even though the world economy might be going through a slowdown, but you look at China population of 1.4 billion, India thereabouts, these, and then quite a growing people that are becoming wealthy and wanting to travel. So the tourist market or the STO market, standard tour operators, we see growth and upside potential in that particular sector.
Great to hear a bit of a positive stance to, slant to that there. And I think also just coming from like some of the things that you've mentioned and a few other points that have been mentioned, is comes to the way you assess the risks and the way investors and also the banks and the DFIs, how they assess the risks. And I think something came up from a conversation with you, and I'd love to have more time to go into it, but I think it's also the people that are asking the questions, if they're not necessarily directly involved on the hospitality side, the tourism side, they need to maybe understand the industry more and I'd almost like challenge them to reassess their risk assessments and kind of understand what because it's not just a risk because you don't understand it, but once you dig into it, there's a lot of spaces that you can get into in tourism and hospitality that are less risky that you can put the money into. So I think there's a lot more of a discussion to be had there. But before we go on to the questions, I think rather than me sitting here giving a summary of the key points, I think if each of you can just, what is the key insight that we think that people should keep in mind at the end of this conversation, briefly?
Okay, so I guess because of where I sit, I will say research. But I think it's not just understanding the market and who your consumers are going to be at the end of the day, and is that market going to come? But also, early in the process, go out and do a market sounding with your investors. Make sure that you understand what each of them will look at, what they want to see, and make sure you've got those documents in place. So your research needs to be on the investor side as well. I think often we develop an entire package. We have a feasibility study and then we take it to an investor, but it hasn't had any sort of understanding of what investors will or will not do. So that you can also see how you can package it in a way that you will get further on the investment side. So for me too, it would be understand your markets both on the investor side as well as on the consumer side.
Well, a couple of things, right? I've been both on the purely operator side and speaking to investors and trying to convince them to take on that brand to operate the hotel. And now I'm being on the investor side, right? So it's very different perspectives, right? So being an investor, well, I'll take it back a little bit. Having hotel projects funded, it is challenging, no doubt. And a lot of that space within the continent is filled with development banks. And we have, as Casara, we have very strong partnership with most of them really, with IFC, DAG, you name it, Proparco. So, I mean, they are filling a mandate, right? I mean, it's all about job creation, sustainable development, which is very critical for our fund. So, yeah, strong financing partners and understanding what sort of a capital structures you can put in place, extremely important. So, the days of funding a hotel or hotel project or an existing hotel acquisition at whatever 80% loan to value ratios is just not going to work. And when we're essentially looking at, if it's a new project, you're looking at 40% debt and 60% equity. And hotels are expensive. But that's the reality of it, right? So when the interest rates are coming down, you can refinance that. You can do a lot of things. But at this juncture, otherwise it's just not feasible.
So you need strong balance sheets.
You need a strong balance sheet, right? There was another point which I forgot now. So maybe
We'll take advantage of that to move on. Mokoena.
No, thanks. I think from an operator point of view, the fundamentals of the sector are solid. I think, we are in Africa, 1.5 billion people currently, 55 countries. The continent is projected to grow to about 2.5 billion by the year 2050. People will still want to travel. We have a myriad of problems here. We are beset with unemployment problems in Africa. It is a sector that can get a lot of people working for it and can alleviate a lot of poverty and unemployment in our countries. So it is a sector that, from a policy point of view, the previous panel, I think they talked to visa issues. Clearly we need to open up the continent. This is the youngest continent. A lot of people want to travel. People have got disposable income despite the fact that there is poverty. So we have seen it as, at least from a Botswana point of view, Air Botswana investing in additional fleet. So you have to have air connectivity opened up so that it's easier for people to travel. Visa restrictions, I think the previous panel talked to it, open up the visas so that people are able to travel. And then the financiers also especially, development financiers to make it easier for would-be investors in the sector to be able to go in there. It's not easy, it's not cheap, it's brick and mortar, it takes time. People want to get a yield, a return, but I think the fundamentals are solid from a sector point of view and it needs to be encouraged. Thanks.
All right, this is actually just a remark, very, very quick one. Compliments to the authorities of Botswana. Arriving at the airport was absolute bliss. It's not so many times that you find an official, customs official, who smiles at you and is quick in what she does. Amazing. I'm an Estonian national. Many of you would probably know Estonia. Not many African countries would, but I think I know our president was here fairly recently. So we require visas to a lot of places. We don't require visas to Botswana, and I think it's the only SADC country where I don't need a visa. So compliments. It's an amazing thing. I mean, keep at it, and I hope others will learn from it.
Cool. Thanks. Hands up who knows where Estonia is. Sorry. Cool. I think we need to move on to some questions from the audience. And there's one online as well.
Yes, ma'am. I think you will see how to go about this one, Robin. I think it was a question that was meant to be directed to Hamza. It's coming in from Lemin Drame. It says, speaks to hotel investors and says, the Gambia needs 5-star hotels and higher brands, I believe. What does it take to attract brands like Hyatt Regency, etc., to these destinations? So you'll see who to give it to.
Going to pass it on, but I think that's quite an interesting one, especially because I've actually been to the Gambia and been and seen some of the way, some things happening there. And I think it also draws on another comment that I'd hoped to find some time to talk about the brands as well, is that the first call is always okay, we need to get an international brand, get them in here, that's what's required to make a project work. And there's many cases where we've seen that actually a regional brand, a local brand, or even no brand might actually be a better fit. And the international brands will say that as well. Sometimes they're not the best. So I just wanted to put that caveat in there quickly before Lasse, maybe you can add something to it.
I think you can answer it just as well. Well, I think it's everything that we've already said in here, right? It's, in the end of the day, it boils down to viability, right? Simple as that. If the market supports it, if the rates are there, if there's a prospect in terms of future developments, you know, what is happening in the market, what is going to be launched in a market that will support the tourism inflow, fantastic. It's simple as that, really. I mean, you have to, it's like buying a car, you know, you want to make sure that there's a good service history, and that service history is about, you know, us buying a hotel, for example, in Gambia. It's about understanding what's under the hood, right? I mean, what's the history? I mean, how has the hotel been performing before? And what are the value-add opportunities to bring it to a level that supports a financial viability for a brand like Hyatt or, you know, Marriott or Sofitel or whatever that may be.
Mokoena, maybe you can, sorry Chris, I'll just, from a brand perspective, Mokoena, maybe you can speak, brand.
Yeah, look, there's international brands and there's a regional brand like ourselves. Clearly, you know, there's different operating models here. So ours, as I said, we enter into leases, into operating leases. But typically the international brands, by and large, they are looking to management contracts, and they will have a shopping list. You know, I can't speak for them, but they will charge substantial management fees. They will charge substantial marketing fees, branding fees, etc. The advantage with that, with any brand, the fact that, you know, you've got brand equity that you can leverage on. You've got a global distribution system from a booking point of view, and also a loyalty program. Because when somebody flies into Botswana, they see Hilton, you know, that from anywhere else in the world, immediately they can relate to that brand, and that's what typically you pay for, and the brand that goes with it, the brand equity.
I just want to talk about the star thing. So often I think people will say we need 5-star. You know, they never say we need 3-star or whatever. They will always say, no, we need 5-star hotels. But I mean, typically the brands have worked away, I guess, from star grading in their portfolios. They have so many different brands within the portfolio that can still be seen by the outside market to some extent as a 5-star or a good quality product, but it's not necessarily 5-star. That comes with the costs of a 5-star, which is often very expensive to build and expensive to fund at the end of the day. So, and I mean, we have also seen combination of brands within one building. So it just depends on what that market would need. I think that market, the Gambia, needs promoters. They need actual hotel developers, not just because not all hotel companies go and build their own hotels and own the hotels. As we said, they may just bring the hotel companies in on management contracts. So that's not always understood by the consumer in the market.
And I think, Robin, you find, you know, internationally there's a move away from stars, from 1-star, 2-star. I think it's more economy. You've got mid-scale, you know, upscale and upper upscale, and then we have the different, you know, brands and sub-brands within all of that. So there has been a shift, you know, from stars, and it's, you know, it's, and again, you know, social media has had a bearing because people typically look at not what the hotel says, but what the review says. So TripAdvisor reviews, you know, guest reviews, somebody who's posted online. So that gives a perception of what the ultimate customer would want from that stay. Not so much of the star or how you perceive yourself, but it's always, the beauty is always in the eyes of the beholder.
Great. Okay. We've got two more questions from the floor. I see a hand in the front here. Oh, and one on the side there. Okay, I see one's got a mic already, so do you want to go ahead?
Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Mamadou Singate, Gambia Tourism and Hospitality Institute. Thank you very much to the panelists for the insightful deliberations that were shared with us this morning. We've had a lot of information regarding incentives, motivations, encouragements for investments in tourism and hospitality. My question is, on a scale of preference, where does the human capacity need fall in terms of motivation for investment in hospitality vis-a-vis quality service production and also profitability on investment? Thank you.
Let's take another one before we get the answers. There you go.
My name is Papi. I'm the head of commercial and government affairs at RX Africa.
Oh, sorry, can't hear you. I don't know.
I said, my name is Papi. I am the head of commercial and government affairs at RX Africa, organizers of WTMs in London, Dubai, and South Africa and Brazil. My question would be about ESGs. I didn't hear a lot of our investors talking about ESGs, which is quite topical these days when it comes to investment, because today is not about profit alone. You also need to take into account issues relating to environment, social and governance, good governance on the continent. So I would like our investors to basically, if they can just tell us what they do. Also just to give us the broader state of ESGs on the continent as far as investment is concerned, of course. Thank you.
Cool, thanks. Does anybody, let's start with the first question, if anybody can volunteer.
I'd like to talk just about the question of what is more important, and I think that's what you asked in respect of how does profitability relate to, say, capacity, I assume even capacity training, etc. So, I mean, when we look at it, often you bring that to bear with bringing on a partner such as a hotel company. And they would often bring the capacity, the ability to train personnel no matter where it is in the world. So that would be, we often find that investors, and Lassa can also speak about this, would look at, do you have the ability to actually run this? Do you have the right key personnel to run this? So if you are the developer going after the investor, you would need to probably bring on your partner that can actually do the management and the operations. So, and there's different ways of getting that. You could have a full management contract, but you could also just have somebody that comes in and just runs the operations, but they don't deal with say, the marketing component of it and the branding. So there's different operators these days that can fulfill these things. So you would normally bring that back. So it is important. I don't think you're going to do an investment, even if it shows great profitability, but you don't see the right management in there. The chances of actually getting to that profitability is much lower, and the risk is much higher to an investor if that's going to fall apart. Also, I know when you look at some of the concessions, often government will require, and I think the investors would also want to see that at the end of the day, that you have a strong operator that comes in as part of your concession bidding entity, and that will remain for the full contract. So if your concession is 25 years, you want to know that they're not going to pull out after 5 years and then leave you high and dry, essentially, with having to change operators, having to change brand, everything that comes with it. Maybe, Leslie, you can speak a little bit about that.
Not
Yeah.
too much, though.
Yeah, so I think, question on ESG, ESG considerations are clearly key. As an operator, you need to be able to demonstrate, particularly if you're looking to appeal to an international clientele, that you're kind to your environment, that, use of solar energy, for instance, use of reclamation of water, and preserving the environment for future generations. I think that's key. We've seen financial institutions issue green bonds that talk to ESG considerations. So I think it's quite topical. It is the right thing to do from an environmental point of view and preservation of lives and livelihoods, particularly for future generations.
If I can add to that to answer the question, and I know there wasn't mentioned to it on the panel, but I think it's obviously still topical. It's very important, so important that we still require whole panels on the ESG discussion. So definitely still topical, but it's something quite difficult to bring in as only part of one whole 40-minute panel. So definitely important. Any final comments?
From COSATA's side about ESG, this is extremely important for us. We have very clear targets what we want to achieve in terms of staff retention, in terms of training, in terms of equality. We want to make sure that we have a certain number of female general managers across the continent. We advocate very much actually cross-African sort of staff rotation. That's something we do. And of course, not to mention from the construction side, we want to make sure that all of our assets achieve a highest standard there is possible in that regard. So there's very clear objectives that we have. And I'm glad you mentioned that. Look, it's not a buzzword, right? So it's luckily so that it is also incentivized by financial institutions, and that is expensive. So in order to achieve a certain interest rates and whatnot, you're going to have to comply. So there is very clearly not only a moral obligation, but there's a financial obligation to it, or incentive to it.
Just to end it off, I think as a side conversation, some people that would have been around yesterday would be following up with a question. Okay, you've got strong female representation in GM level. What about the middle management? And what about the IC and the ownership? Anyway, thanks so much to the panel. I think, it's been interesting for me. I hope it's been useful and interesting to the audience as well. So thanks very much.
Another round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, for that panel on Beyond the Pitch, what hotel and hospitality investors and financiers would like to know. Ladies and gentlemen, please note the Botswana Tourism Organization is conducting an evaluation survey to determine the socio-economic impact of the 7th edition of the Africa Tourism Leadership Forum and Awards. As such, your feedback through the questionnaire link sent to your emails will help us in determining the impact of the 2024 ATLF on our economy. Ladies and gentlemen, with that said, we are now going for a short 15-minute grab and go refreshment break. Please ensure you are back in the hall in exactly 15 minutes so we continue with today's programs. Our VIPs and speakers will be ushered upstairs where they'll be served some refreshments while the rest of the day will be served outside.
We have some of the most progressive conservation policies. This has resulted in us being home to the 1,000th World Heritage Site, the Okavango Delta. It originates from the highlands of Angola, and fresh water, the freshest water you can imagine, trickling down, traveling over 1,000 kilometers, and when it gets into Botswana, it drains into a delta. And when it spans out, it waters and quenches the thirst of the mighty Kalahari Desert. And when that happens, you get the most diverse, exotic, aquatic species in a desert. And the flora and fauna that emerges from there, it's almost as if God in the book of Genesis left yesterday. It's beautiful, beyond measure. And there you can be in the midst of all this and feel truly the African regal presence. So come to my country and I'll take you on a tour.
Africa Tourism Leadership Forum is a Pan-African dialogue platform that brings together key stakeholders of Africa's travel, tourism, hospitality, and aviation sectors to network, share insights, and devise strategies for intra-Africa travel and tourism growth across the continent while enhancing the brand equity of Destination Africa. It is the only forum of its kind in Africa that highlights tourism as a major economic pillar to diversify African economies. The forum is convened by Africa Tourism Partners in collaboration with the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat, AFCFTA, UNWTO, and BDO. It is also supported by Industrial Development Corporation, IDC, of South Africa, Marriott International, Protea Massa Square, Avani Hotels, Hilton Garden Inn, and Grandeur Rentals. The 6th Africa Tourism Leadership Forum held in Botswana was hosted by the government of the Republic of Botswana through the Botswana Tourism Organization. The forum was attended by over 700 physical delegates from over 50 different countries across the globe. Additionally, more than 4,000 delegates attended the forum virtually and over 25 media houses.
I derive some immense pleasure and pride over the fact that for the second consecutive year, fellow Africans from various shores of our beautiful continent are converging in Botswana. Your presence here bears testimony to the important role that travel and tourism plays in our nations as the nucleus that binds us geographically and economically. I'm informed that more than 500 participants from various African countries and the rest of the world are a part of this event here physically, and hundreds more participating virtually, as we've seen just a few minutes ago. This is a clear manifestation for a true spirit of Pan-Africanism upon which this event derives its political, philosophical inspiration.
In collaboration with AFCFTA, Africa Tourism Partners conducted a forum on tourism creators and cultural industries, which is a pivotal event aligning with the AFCFTA Protocol on Trade and Services. This platform celebrates dynamic sectors, addresses challenges, and advances Africa's economic competitiveness through sustainable tourism and cultural development.
Part of of the work we're doing is to ensure that we harmonize policies, the laws and the regulations that actually are part of the tourism sector. So if we are able to harmonize the laws and regulations, we bring about the predictability in the different sectors. So if we bring predictability in the tourism sector, then a tourist is more comfortable, or an investor in the tourism sector is more comfortable, because then they know what I find in Tanzania is what I'll find in Botswana, and it will be easier for the tourists to come and use the services that I have. So our work really is to ensure that that intra-African trade between countries actually takes place.
The forum ignites intra-African trade and empowerment, reinforcing a unified vision for a culturally enriched Africa.
Well, the importance of attending forums like this is obviously to get more knowledge about the tourism sector in Africa. It's to get to connect with other tour operators and players in the tourism industry to learn more and to connect. We are trying to do what we call inter-Africa tourism, to build a brand tourism, or to build a tourism sector in Africa, whereby we showcase what we offer in our countries to fellow companions in other countries, and just to build the tourism sector and grow the tourism sector within Africa, whereby we teach Africans to travel in Africa. That obviously helps to grow the economy of Africa, to help grow the sectors of tourism in Africa in different parts of the countries in Africa.
So the idea here is to ensure that at all levels of operation we are able to deliver services in the quality and in the quality of service that we would want to be known for across the continent or globally. I want to see Africans consuming the African tourism product, and this requires that all of us sitting here make it possible for Africans to visit Africa, make it possible for the world to also view Africa as a destination that should be visited and a destination that should be admired. There is so much that we have in Africa. Can we show it to the world? Can we share it with the world? So really this ATLF 2023 is just about that. It's about ensuring that we move a step forward.
The one thing I love about a forum like this and initiatives like this is that they are literally just connecting all the dots. When we are based at home, or in South Africa rather, the market is really small, and we would like to be, we are building something that is for global recognition. What we have created is something that the entire world would need or love to see or experience rather. So a platform like this really helps us in connecting with everybody that is relevant in the industry, everybody that will teach us something that we might not know. Just the knowledge exchange alone is humongous, let alone the marketing and branding opportunities that are there.
In supporting efforts of inclusivity and sustainability, the 6th ATLF provided a platform for Tourism for All project, which addresses challenges faced by people with disabilities in tourism and hospitality.
My name is Margaret Getty. I'm a journalist and a TV producer at Tanzania Safari Channel, which is under Tanzania Broadcasting Corporation. Tanzania Safari Channel is a separate channel that promotes tourism, culture, and history. And I am assisting to Madani in producing a series of documentaries called Tourism for All, and it's aimed at promoting tourism among people with disabilities. So whenever Madani cannot reach some places, I assist in the production.
Simultaneously hosted with the Africa Tourism Leadership Forum and Awards 2023, the Africa Tourism Leadership Awards is the only Pan-African industry awards of its kind in Africa. It recognizes and celebrates change makers and innovation pioneered by Africans in Africa for African travel, tourism, hospitality, and aviation industries. Africa Tourism Leadership Forum, igniting intra-Africa tourism through inclusive intra-Africa trade partnerships and investments. Africa Tourism Leadership Forum, is a Pan-African dialogue platform that brings together key stakeholders of Africa's travel, tourism, hospitality, and aviation sectors to network, share insights, and
we have some of the most progressive conservation policies. This has resulted in us being home to the 1,000th World Heritage Site, the Okavango Delta. It originates from the highlands of Angola, and fresh water, the freshest water you can imagine, trickling down, traveling over 1,000 kilometers, and when it gets into Botswana, it drains into a delta. And when it spans out, it waters and quenches the thirst of the mighty Kalahari Desert. And when that happens, you get the most diverse, exotic, aquatic species in a desert. And the flora and fauna that emerges from there, it's almost as if God in the book of Genesis left yesterday. It's beautiful, beyond measure. And there you can be in the midst of all this and feel truly the African regal presence. So come to my country and I'll take you on a tour. We have some of the most progressive conservation policies. This has resulted in us being home to the 1,000th World Heritage Site, the Okavango Delta. It originates from the highlands of Angola, and fresh water, the freshest water you can imagine, trickling down, traveling over 1,000 kilometers, and when it gets into Botswana, it drains into a delta. And when it spans out, it waters and quenches the thirst of the mighty Kalahari Desert. And when that happens, you get the most diverse, exotic, aquatic species in a desert. And the flora and fauna that emerges from there, it's almost as if God in the book of Genesis left yesterday. It's beautiful, beyond measure. And there you can be in the midst of all this and feel truly the African regal presence. So come to my country and I'll take you on a tour. We have some of the most progressive conservation policies. This has resulted in us being home to the 1,000th World Heritage Site, the Okavango Delta. It originates from the highlands of Angola, and fresh water, the freshest water you can imagine, trickling down, traveling over 1,000 kilometers, and when it gets into Botswana, it drains into a delta. And when it spans out, it waters and quenches the thirst of the mighty Kalahari Desert. And when that happens, you get the most diverse, exotic, aquatic species in a desert. And the flora and fauna that emerges from there, it's almost as if God in the book of Genesis left yesterday. It's beautiful, beyond measure. And there you can be in the midst of all this and feel truly the African regal presence. So come to my country and I'll take you on a tour. We have some of the most progressive conservation policies. This has resulted in us being home to the 1,000th World Heritage Site, the Okavango Delta. It originates from the highlands of Angola, and fresh water, the freshest water you can imagine, trickling down, traveling over 1,000 kilometers, and when it gets into Botswana, it drains into a delta. And when it spans out, it waters and quenches the thirst of the mighty Kalahari Desert. And when that happens, you get the most diverse, exotic, aquatic species in a desert. And the flora and fauna that emerges from there, it's almost as if God in the book of Genesis left yesterday. It's beautiful beyond measure. And there you can be in the midst of all this and feel truly the African regal presence. So come to my country and I'll take you on a tour. We have some of the most progressive conservation policies. This has resulted in us being home to the 1000th World Heritage Site, the Okavango Delta. It originates from the highlands of Angola, and fresh water, the freshest water you can imagine, trickling down, traveling over 1,000 kilometers, and when it gets into Botswana, it drains into a delta. And when it spans out, it waters and quenches the thirst of the mighty Kalahari Desert. And when that happens, you get the most diverse, exotic, aquatic species in a desert. And the flora and fauna that emerges from there, it's almost as if God in the book of Genesis left yesterday. It's beautiful beyond measure. And there you can be in the midst of all this and feel truly the African regal presence. So come to my country and I'll take you on a tour.
Africa Tourism Leadership Forum is a Pan-African dialogue platform that brings together key stakeholders of Africa's travel, tourism, hospitality, and aviation sectors to network, share insights, and devise strategies for intra-Africa travel and tourism growth across the continent while enhancing the brand equity of Destination Africa. It is the only forum of its kind in Africa that highlights tourism as a major economic pillar to diversify African economies. The forum is convened by Africa Tourism Partners in collaboration with the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat, AFCFTA, UNWTO, and BDO. It is also supported by Industrial Development Corporation, IDC, of South Africa, Marriott International, Protea Massa Square, Avani Hotels, Hilton Garden Inn, and Grandeur Rentals. The 6th Africa Tourism Leadership Forum held in Botswana was hosted by the government of the Republic of Botswana through the Botswana Tourism Organization. The forum was attended by over 700 physical delegates from over 50 different countries across the globe. Additionally, more than 4,000 delegates attended the forum virtually and over 25 media houses.
I derive some immense pleasure and pride over the fact that for the second consecutive year, fellow Africans from various shores of our beautiful continent are converging in Botswana. Your presence here bears testimony to the important role that travel and tourism plays in our nations as the nucleus that binds us geographically and economically. I'm informed that more than 500 participants from various African countries and the rest of the world are a part of this event here physically, and hundreds more participating virtually, as we've seen just a few minutes ago. This is a clear manifestation for a true spirit of Pan-Africanism, upon which this event derives its political, philosophical inspiration.
In collaboration with AFCFTA, Africa Tourism Partners conducted a forum on tourism creators and cultural industries, which is a pivotal event aligning with the AFCFTA Protocol on Trade in Services. This platform celebrates dynamic sectors, addresses challenges, and advances Africa's economic competitiveness through sustainable tourism and cultural development.
the work we're doing is to ensure that we harmonize policies, the laws and the regulations that actually are part of the tourism sector. So if we are able to harmonize the laws and regulations, we bring about the predictability in the different sectors. So if we bring predictability in the tourism sector, then a tourist is more comfortable, or an investor in the tourism sector is more comfortable, because then they know what I find in Tanzania is what I'll find in Botswana, and it will be easier for the tourists to come and use the services that I have. So our work really is to ensure that that intra-African trade between countries actually takes place.
The forum ignites intra-African trade and empowerment, reinforcing a unified vision for a culturally enriched Africa.
Well, the importance of attending forums like this is obviously to get more knowledge about the tourism sector in Africa. It's to get to connect with other tour operators and players in the tourism industry to learn more and